Thank you, Mr. Toastmaster. Fellow Toastmasters and honored guest, I am so thrilled to be with you today to have the opportunity to present to you the Western Caribbean. This is a part of the world I've had the opportunity to visit often. As a little child, my father established a clinic in the highlands of Guatemala. He was a philanthropist, a medical doctor, and it was his quest to bring medical care to the indigenous people of this part of the world. So when I was 8 years old, he packed up the whole family in camper and took us all south. I remember winding the narrow little dirt road that led up to the tiny village of Cunin. I remember thinking that the camper was going to go over the edge, but knowing my dad was at the wheel, so we were okay. When we got to Cunin, I was introduced to a whole new way of life. I'd been raised in the United States. I had things like refrigeration, indoor plumbing. But in the highlands of Guatemala, I had neither of these. But I had two maids, Julia and Petronila. They were my favorite people. They were teenage girls. I didn't know it then, but they were paid more than anybody else in the town to come and help us out. 10 children in one casa. My mom helped my dad at the clinic, and people would come from miles around with their sick children to see the physician who would treat them and help the tiny little 3-year-olds with the distended tummies from malnutrition, and help the people who had lost limbs and had experienced all kinds of illness. It was a fabulous experience for a little girl. And it introduced me to a whole new culture. I went to escuela with the other little Mayan children, and I sat by them in school. The teacher asked me to teach him English. And he made a deal with me. He said, I'll teach you Spanish if you'll teach me English. Now, if you watch Willy Wonka, you know that it is pretentious and rude for a student to teach a teacher. But he didn't see it that way, so I didn't either. And I commenced to teach. It was a great experience. I learned something. I learned that people are people wherever you go. And I learned that the little children in the United States aren't too different from the little children in Guatemala. There was the same kind of little groups that happened at school. There was the same kind of, oh, look what she's wearing today. Now the difference is they wore traditional garb, which was very different from Western clothing. And I was kind of overdressed, even though I only had 2 different outfits to wear a day, because that's how Mom let me take the whole trip. But we were wealthy. We were rich just because I had a different change of clothes than these children. I was clean. They were filthy and covered with lice. I brought lice home to my family. I can never say I didn't give them anything. I wanted to share with you a little bit about their culture. Now, when we think of that part of the world, we think of indigenous peoples, and a lot of you are familiar with the Aztec and the Mayans. We've heard a lot lately because the Mayans predicted the world will end in 2012. Has anybody else heard this? I want to tell you, I have discovered the reason that we think that. I have a Mayan calendar at home, and you know what is really fascinating to me is that their calendar is not based on a lunar system. It's not based on the solar system like every other calendar ever invented. It's based on a way of thinking. It's based on consciousness. That's what they say. It's on understanding. And there's a great cartoon of a Mayan artist creating that calendar and saying, I ran out of room. It's going to end in 2012. And his friend says, that's going to make somebody crazy. And it has, hasn't it? Now, it's really interesting. If you believe some of the Mayan traditions, like that the world will end on December 23rd, 2012, you're in good company. Because the Mayans themselves, the Aztecs, believed in some of these traditions. For example, in the year 1519, it was said that their great bearded white god, Quetzalcoatl, would return. He'd left years and years before. He had drank chocolate, and it was poisoned, and so it made him kind of crazy. Now, Quetzalcoatl was the bearded white god of the Mayan tradition who introduced the cocoa tree to the people. It was the greatest gift. And anybody else love chocolate? Do you know why it was a great gift? Chocolate was something that was only for royalty. The great Montezuma drank like 14 cups of chocolate a day. And it wasn't the hot chocolate we think of, because it wasn't mixed with milk until later on, when it became a European treat. Then it was just the straight chocolate, the straight cocoa bean. Not only was cocoa a drink for the gods and a drink for royalty, but the bean itself was basically money. It had monetary value. When Hernan Cortez first came to the people, and guess what? He had a beard. He was a white guy. And guess when he came? On the exact date that the Mayans had predicted Quetzalcoatl, the bearded white god, would return. There's a reason Montezuma believed that this man was a god. And not only did he have the white skin and the dark beard, but he also came in a ship that had billowing white sails, and he came from the direction that Quetzalcoatl was thought to have left in. And so they worshipped him, they honored him, they brought him cases and boatloads of cocoa beans. Now his helpers looked at those cocoa beans and went, what are these? They're like little cockroaches. What are they? Tossed them in the water. All of the Aztecs dove in the water because that was money. You could buy a good meal and a place to stay for one cocoa bean about that time. So in our time, that'd be, one cocoa bean would be about $50 for us. So there was monetary value in cocoa. Chocolate was an amazing gift from Quetzalcoatl. Let me help you understand just a little bit the difference between a Mayan and an Aztec. Do you know the difference? When you see someone, in fact, my high school students, I worked with kids who are from a diverse background, and a couple of years ago, I asked a girl what nationality she was. She hung her head down and she said, "I'm Mexican." And I said, "You are Aztec! Look at you! You descend from royalty!" Because the Aztecs came after the Mayans. The Mayans were more closer to the mother civilization. The Olmecs were the mother civilization, which were hundreds and hundreds of years ago. The Mayans were a little bit older than that. And they built the great buildings that are there, that architectures have gone in and tried to discover the history. Where did they go? Well, if you ask someone in that part of the world where the Mayans went, they'll say, "Here I am. We didn't go anywhere." And yes, the civilization collapsed, but there were some survivors for whatever happened. And then the Aztecs came in, and they came from the north. If you think of the flag, the Mexican flag, you might recall that there is a picture on it of a cactus and an eagle eating a snake. Now these people came from the north with the idea, they had had a visionary person say, when you find a place where there's a cactus with a snake on it and an eagle is eating it, that's where you stay. Well, that is the heart of Mexico City today, where they found that place. The Aztecs were the next civilization, and that was who was in power when Hernan Cortez conquered. It is an amazing part of the world. I want to share more with you, but I'm running out of time. So thanks for listening. If you get a chance to go to the Western Caribbean, I highly recommend it, and say hi to all my Mayan friends. Thank you.